on my end, and he'll let me know, and I'll get the system rebooted or whatever, just so you know if gate pops on. All right, so what we're going to cover today real quick is professional quality of life, stress, trauma, give you several coping strategies, and then some resources. But I want to tell you a little bit about how this whole training in Kansas City evolved, and even a bigger training than that. Back in 2014, I was the CIT commander for Kansas City, which is a pretty big CIT program. I have over 500 trained officers, and I have a dedicated unit. And our local mental health provider, one of our major ones, approached me and said, what would you think about doing a training session for your folks, taught by your folks, designed by your folks and us together, that talked about secondary trauma? Well, back in 2014, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about secondary trauma, so I didn't know much about it. And I basically told her, yeah, I'll get back with you. And we present all the time 5 years later, and she will tell everybody that by the look of my eyes, she thought she would never hear from me again. But after I heard about it, I did a little research, and as a patrol commander, I started getting sent on some really severe calls that maybe we've always been sent on, and I just never paid attention. But I started noticing an increase in the calls where I was being dispatched on the attempted suicides or threats of suicides of my own officers, of our family members, of our partners or their children. I started getting sent on the domestic violence calls of our children, of our partners' children's, of the firefighters' children, or the members themselves. I started getting sent on the DUI calls of my own officers, of our partners, of our children's. And something dawned on me pretty quickly that, you know what, there is something going on in our career field that's not only affecting us, it's affecting our family. So we need to do something. So I went back to them and said, yep, I'm on board. Let's do this. We put together a pretty good sized group. And for the next 5 months, we designed what ended up being a 4-hour training called Building Resilience, Surviving Secondary Trauma. We did it March 31st, 2015 for the first time. And it was a 4-hour training that went about 5 hours because I was new to teaching it, as well as my co-presenter. And we were still working some things out. And I thought everybody would just leave us and get out of there as quick as they could. But the neatest thing happened. They actually stuck around for about another hour and a half on their own, talking about the topic, talking about the things we talked about, and how finally they felt free they could talk about these things. So what that did is it just continued on, and we started incorporating our mental health providers, offering it to them, fire departments, Department of Social Services, Department of Corrections, Children's Division, basically anybody who was dealing with the same situations we were, with the same type of mentality of our career field. We thought they could benefit from it. And I could tell you that training has now been presented to over 5,000 people from over 500 agencies across the world, and it still goes strong. And off of that training was trainings like this that have been developed. So that's where I want to give you the backstory of that. And it's important to know the backstory because we have done ourselves a great disservice in my career field of law enforcement, as well as the mental health career fields and any first providers out there, because we don't prepare our folks for what they're going to see. When I came, my police academy was 7 months long. And if you can imagine a 7-month long academy, they spent a lot of time teaching me how to shoot, how to drive, and how to fight, because those are the things that are going to keep me alive, or at least traditionally. And I'll tell you what, we do a good job teaching that. But I can tell you in my 28 years on the police department, I've had to use that training very little compared to some other training I wish I would have had. Because if we were in a room together and I asked you how many of you had been involved in a life-threatening condition, like a shootout or like a fight for your life or an accident so severe somebody got hurt, very few people would raise their hands is what I find. But now if I ask the same question, especially to a bunch of police, fire, EMS folks of, can you tell me in vivid detail the sound a mother is going to make when you tell her child's dead? Almost everybody will raise their hand. Can you tell me in vivid detail what the sight of a human body looks like if they've been jumped off a bridge and been run over by a tractor trailer and dragged down the road? Can you tell me in vivid detail the feeling you feel as you're staring at somebody in their eyes as they take their last breath? See, those are the things we deal with on a daily basis. And they don't spend any time in our academies or in our colleges preparing us for that. In fact, we spend very little time, even in our field training programs, preparing our folks. Instead, we think it's funny just to throw them out there and then say, hey, let's see what kind of reaction we get from Darren. The first time he sees his first decomposing dead body, as opposed to saying, you know what, Darren, we're on this way to this decomposing dead body, and you may want to be aware of this is what's going to happen. This is how you may feel. That's okay. That's normal. So that's some of the traumatic stress we're going to talk about. The regular stress, the chronic stress, we don't spend nearly enough time talking about it, so we're going to spend some time on that as well. So let's start with the first thing, the professional quality of life. If you've never done the ProQual, I highly recommend you go to the website I have down the bottom there and do this ProQual questionnaire. It's 30 questions, and in that simple 30 questions, it's going to tell you how you are doing in your professional quality of life. And what a professional quality of life looks like, something like this. It's compassion satisfaction, compassion fatigue, and then that's even that's even broken down further by burned out and exposure to secondary trauma. Those 30 questions, it takes more than maybe 10 minutes to do and about 5 minutes to score, will tell you at any given time how you're doing in those areas. And those are important areas. We recommend you do this at least quarterly, and I recommend you do it in a group, not answer the questions, but if you're a supervisor, you can start off the first of the day of your back to work as a quarter where you all sit around and you do it. You don't even have to share it, but you just do it. All right, so let's get a little bit more in depth with ProQual. So that compassion satisfaction, it's that positive feeling you get from doing a job well. You know, it's a sense of fulfillment, the excitement. And if I were to ask you what's the first thing you think about when you see these pictures, what stands out, we did not intend for you to say this, but every class for the last 500 classes has said the same thing, the smiles on their face. And what that means is that they are happy to be where they are, what they're doing. They're excited to come to work every day. I remember that feeling. For law enforcement, it lasts about 3 to 5 years normally. Firefighters, I heard it lasts a little bit longer. Depends what part of the social work spectrum you're on. It could last longer, could last less. But this is where we want to be at all times. So this is, if you think about a pitcher of water, this is where our pitcher is completely full. We are happy to be there every single day, and we want nothing more than to go back to work the next day. Now, on the other side of that scale is compassion fatigue, and that's the emotional strain of witnessing or working with those suffering from traumatic events. Isn't that our job? Isn't that what we do on a daily basis, no matter who we are, if we're in this career field, this helping career field, that's what we're doing. But I like to tell people that the layman's version of that is when my give a crap meter is stuck on I don't give a crap anymore. And that happens. And the weird thing is it doesn't happen all at once. You don't just go from compassion satisfaction all the way over to compassion fatigue just like that. There's the telltale signs popping up. We just need to know to look for them. Now, the bad thing is we have safeguards in place at work. We know that if we act bad to somebody because they're suffering from compassion fatigue, we treat a victim like a suspect, we start letting our mouth spout off. There are safeguards in place. There's a chances are we're going to get called in by our supervisor, someone's going to file a citizen's complaint, we could get sued. So we're very careful at work. But where we're not careful is at home. So all that stuff builds up all day long, and we get home and your child comes running up to you and says, Daddy, let me tell you about the day I had. And you have nothing left to give. And all you say, you use the words, or with your appearance, your body language, they figure out pretty quickly, leave me alone. I don't want to hear it. So that empty pitcher, that's that compassion fatigue. So like I said, it doesn't go there just automatically, but the ProQual will let you know if you're starting to suffer from some compassion fatigue. And we'll talk about how to get back out of that, back up to compassion satisfaction. Burnout, we've all heard about it before. All I need you to remember in this case is that burnout does not have to be trauma related. It's usually stress related. But if you are suffering from burnout and then you're exposed to a traumatic event, the chances of you then suffering from PTS symptoms later on are much more likely than if you had not been suffering from burnout in the first place. So if you know how you're doing on that scale, it helps to know what you're doing if you're starting to suffer from burnout or not. And the ProQual is a 90-page pamphlet. It's all free. It can even give you ideas on how to lessen the effects of the burnout. But everything I tell you today will also help that. So the last part is the secondary trauma. And like I said, it was new back in 2014, at least in my career field. But it's the side effect or result of seeing or hearing about acts of cruelty, blah, blah, blah. I'll let you read it yourself right there. But basically, it's being exposed to and affected by the trauma of others. Once again, that's our job. but its symptoms of secondary trauma mimic those of post-traumatic stress. Now you see we have a title as post-traumatic stress because we don't like to use the word post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, that is a medical diagnosis. And to be diagnosed with PTSD, you have to go through quite the process to include answering questions, going through an interview process with professionals. And more importantly, it's labeled as a disorder. And if you ask most first responders, most anybody, do you really want to have a disorder? They're not going to want to do it. So it's very stigmatizing. So we just talk about it as post-traumatic stress. So its symptoms of PTSD, secondary trauma, mimic those of post-traumatic stress. What are those symptoms? It's important for you to know those as well, because if we were in the room, we would actually have you shout them out and we would list them all together. So I'm just going to bring up the next slide, and it's going to list the most common answers that I get after all these years of doing this training. Or maybe it won't, because it looks like we lost our screen. Hold on, folks. Give me a second. I can get this fixed. Looks like by myself. All right, not sure why we went black. Sorry about that.
Is this,
So, we got it back on?
Yep, it all looks good.
Awesome. All right, so these are the questions, or the answers, I'm sorry, that I get more than any other time. Symptoms of PTS. I said, people would shout them out, and they say irritability, depression, flashbacks, sleep issues, hyperarousal, lack of intimacy, suicidal thoughts. You see them all right there. And I will tell you, folks, I have never, ever been diagnosed with PTSD. Never have. But I will tell you that I have suffered from each one of these, with the exception of suicidal thoughts, each one of these symptoms up there. And that's why it's so important that we know what those signs and symptoms are, because if we know them, then we know that we're starting to feel some things, and what we're starting to feel is actually normal. It's normal, possible things that can happen based upon seeing what we see on a daily basis. Because remember, what's normal for us is not normal for everybody else. It's just normal for us. And it's all right to feel that way. So let's get a little bit about stress as we go into this a little bit. So, you know, stress is your body's way of helping you rise to a challenge. And we have a little bit of a delay on our thing again, so give me a second. When you sense that danger, whether it's real or imagined, that stress response kicks in. But at a certain point, as you see, it starts being helpful and actually starts causing major damage to your health. It starts affecting your quality of life. If you think about, I don't know about you, but there's times if you make a mistake of doing what I do, you buy your furniture in a box, and it can be the most expensive furniture in the world. You have to put it together, and you're sitting there 4 hours later into it, and you can't get a simple part into another part. And that stress just builds up, and then after all, out of nowhere, you just blow a gasket. That's that stress, and that's when it starts affecting your quality of life and your relationships, because you're also probably doing what I do, which is yelling at your spouse, yelling at your children, and they make the mistake of wanting to help and come in and offer that help. So whether real or imagined, remember, your stress response is going to kick in. So what does that stress response look like? I think you've all heard of fight, flight, or freeze. That is your human stress response. We actually use a model that adds the appease to it, and that's a newer model. Some people agree with it, some people do not. But I will tell you that's the model we like, the model we used to like. But if you look at those things, remember, you're born with a stress response. A way that you're going to react to a situation is something you're usually born with and established early on. So maybe you're a fighter, where someone you're going to confront the threat right away. Maybe you're someone who flees and you're going to run or escape, or you try to avoid the threat altogether. Or maybe you're someone who's more of a freezer, so you're paralyzed, or you retreat within a collapse or disassociate. I'm more of an appeaser, where I try to pacify everyone and tend to befriend, and that can be a learned behavior, but that's my natural thing that I have. Now, the reason it's important for you to know what your natural one is, and I'll talk about the brain in just a minute, is in my career field, and many in like fire and EMS is the same way. we actually train that one out of you. We don't want you to necessarily always be a fighter, or you can't be a freezer. I mean, that could cost some of your life. So we actually make you one that you follow based upon your learned experience, your training. But you need to know the real one too, because if you're not careful, that real one may come out in the least opportune time. So what does that look like? What is that, the brain science behind this a little bit? I'm going to do this in quick 3 minutes, so we're not spending a lot of time on it. Front part of your brain is your prefrontal cortex. For the adult male, that's not usually formed until they're 26 years old. That's where you do all your good thinking, your cognitive thought. You're the wise leader part of your brain, the wizard brain. It's where you make the rational decision. So when you ask your 20-year-old son, what the heck were you thinking? He goes, I don't know. He's actually not lying. That part of the brain's just not fully developed yet. So there's a good chance he was not quite sure what he was doing. And then you have the amygdala, which is that little almond-shaped thing up there in your inner brain. You see it on the diagram. And Basil van der Kolk, in his book, The Body Keeps a Score, labels that best. He says, that's your smoke detector. That's the thing that goes off when your body senses danger. Something may hurt me, something may try to kill me, and it hijacks your brain, and all the blood leaves the prefrontal cortex down the amygdala, and a bunch of stress hormones are secreted, like adrenaline, like cortisol, like oxytocin, all things that are meant to keep you alive in that moment. But if your wise part of your brain is no longer thinking, you're operating at amygdala, that's that tunnel vision we all learn about. That's where all I can do is think about staying alive. And if you stay in that amygdala too long, you can't get back to that. You can't have that rational decisions. So maybe you've watched a video before where a police officer handcuffs somebody, and maybe they know there's a helicopter above them, a news helicopter, but yet they still, after they got the person handcuffed and maybe the person spit on them, the officer takes a couple sucker punches at them or kicks them. And all you and I, as we're watching this video, are thinking is, how could they possibly even do that? That's crazy. But remember, we're not in that life-threatening condition. Our brain is in the prefrontal cortex where we can look at it and say, wow, I better not do that. So we have to have ways, and I'm going to show you a great way in the next 15 minutes on how we can get ourselves out of our amygdala to our prefrontal cortex quickly. Because we only need to survive that life-threatening condition, hopefully for a very short period, and then we need to make the rational decision of, okay, now what's going on? And then I make my wise decisions based upon that. So that's a simple little brain science 101, and we're going to keep it that simple just so you realize that the difference, because it's important as we talk about stress a little bit more. Because when we talk about the effects of chronic stress, you see the very first bullet point, your nervous system isn't very good at distinguishing between emotional and physical threats. And the more we trip that amygdala, and the more we have those stress responses, the harder it is to shut it off. So if you think about our job, if you're in a major metropolitan city as a police officer, as fire, as EMS, or maybe you're a children's division worker who's out doing a lot of calls, or maybe you're a clinician who sees a lot of high-stress clients, chances are your amygdala is being activated several times a day. Whereas opposed to the general population, and maybe it's lucky if it happens once a month, once a year to them. So after a while, our body and our system stops distinguishing between emotional and physical. And that's why maybe you just tear into your children when it's nothing more than stress, but your body says, wow, I'm under this life-threatening condition, and I better react like I normally would, which in a police officer world, it's going to be fight. And the way we fight is we fight with our words, and then we fight physically. So keep on going down, because chronic stress disrupts I want you to know that it disrupts nearly every system in your body. It can suppress your immune system. That's because of the cortisol. Same with the digestive and reproductive system, because what that cortisol does, which is part of your stress response, is it actually shuts down those systems, because you do not need your immune system, your digestive system, or your reproductive system to survive a life-threatening condition. You need all that blood to go somewhere else. And it also speeds up the aging process, which I find amazing when I first put this training together a couple of years ago. Because I always wondered, I asked myself, when you saw a president at the beginning of their term and at the end of the term, wow, they got old. I wonder what happened to them. So here's a perfect example. Look at President Obama when he first took office and when he left the office. 8 years later. And that picture's like 7 years later. George W. Bush. Bill Clinton. LBJ, that was about a 5-year difference. I can't tell much difference about him. He looks a little bit older, but I can't tell a whole lot more difference. But that was one of the best pictures I could find as well. But that's the effects of chronic stress right there. And if you look back at your picture from maybe 5 years ago, if you're in a high stress job, I bet you would notice that you have a lot of aging that maybe your friends who are not in that situation, maybe they don't have. So let's talk more about it, because I really want you to know more about this stress and some of the things that can be caused by it, or some of the problems that can happen. Because remember, stress is your body's way of protecting you. And while it motivates you at times, too much of it can really cause a lot of our problem. And I say too much of it, you can't really stop stress, but there's ways, some tools I'll give you that you can, maybe how stress affects you. But, some of the problems caused by it, sleep problems, reproductive issues, memory problems, heart disease, things that if you went back to our initial list of problems that we have, PTS signs and symptoms, many of these ones will actually pop up on there. So signs and symptoms of stress overload. Well, I want you to know these because one of the things I want you to talk about is when we talk about traumatic stress, and you can do this when you talk to your friends, your family, anybody you want to share information with. I want to normalize this because I don't want you ever feeling that you're not normal, that what you're feeling is not normal. These are normal things happening for very unusual situations that we go through. But if you start noticing you have memory problems, poor judgment, seeing only the negative in things. How many friends do you know that are pessimistic about everything? I can tell you in the police officer world, it's about 80% of my friends are that way. Anxious or racing thoughts, constant worrying, anxiety and agitation, feeling overwhelmed, and then finally loneliness and isolation. That's a very dangerous one. We'll talk about it a little bit further coming up. But these are things that you should be looking at in yourself and looking for in your subordinates, your friends, your family members. If you're seeing a lot of these things, that means they're going into stress overload, and we need to find some mitigating factors, some tools we can give them to help them out. My attitude, just let you look at a few more. We won't talk much about them, but you would see these coordinate really with the cortisol, the massive amount of cortisol that's in our system. So what are the things we can do? I've told you all the bad. So what are some things we can do to help ourselves? Here's a big one right there, your support network. A strong support network, or its friends and family members, is an enormous buffer to help with stress overload. You need others. You don't want to do this by yourself. That's where your peer network comes in. That's where your friends come in. We're going to talk about why this is so important when we talk a little bit more about stress resilience. Your sense of control. If you think you have little control over your life, then you're at the mercy of your environment, then chances are that it's going to paralyze you with fear, and you're not going to have that outlook to where you can change it. That's our next bullet point, your attitude and your outlook. Somebody who has a positive outlook and a positive attitude is going to be able to deal with the stress much more likely, or much more effectively. I'm a very hopeful person. I'm a very optimistic person. And that helps me more than anything else, because when I'm next to Debbie Downer or Debbie Doug, and something happens to the exact same thing to us, and they keep on saying that, hey, the world's coming to an end, or whatever it may be, I am looking at something and saying, well, now this is a way we can actually better ourselves. This thing will help us deal with it better. Another thing is your knowledge and preparation. If you know what's coming on, it's that lack of control that really bothers us at times. So I think Southwest Airlines does this better than anybody else. I used to be really fearful of flying due to some issues. I was in the Air Force for 9 years, and I flew all the time. But then on a flight from Kansas City to St. Louis, a simple 40-minute flight, we hit one of the worst thunderstorms I've ever been in, and we were dropping, it felt like 10,000 feet at a time, and everything was dropping out of the thing, and I thought we were going to die. And from that point on, it took me a long time to get ready to want to fly again. But what Southwest does, if you ever pay attention, is they realize things like this, and the pilot will always get on the intercom and say, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting ready to hit a small rough patch. Just so you know, it shouldn't take us more than 5 minutes to get through it. Don't be worried. I'm going to try to climb that or go around it. All of that knowledge makes your brain a little bit more easy, saying, this is what I know is going to happen. So this is what you're preparing yourself for. It's when you don't know what's going to happen is when it's so stressful. So try to improve your knowledge. Try to be prepared on what you can do to help with that. So what are some other things you can do? Get moving. You need exercise, folks, believe it or not. I know we've heard 30 minutes a day, all for every day you can, but a study came out of the UK about 2 years ago that said, actually, if you can just get 150 minutes in a week, even if that meant that 2.5 hours you do, that was all done in, I think it's 150 hours, I'm sorry, 150 minutes in a week, that 2.5 hours you do in the weekend, you can do it on a Saturday and Sunday because maybe your Monday and Friday were so busy. It's just as effective for you as if you had done it that 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So get moving. It helps it helps get the cortisol out of your system. That's one of the best things it'll do for you. But when you're moving, do it in a mindful manner. And we'll talk about mindfulness at the end, but don't just sit there and run and be on your phone looking at Facebook or walking. Put some headphones in, listen to some music, take some deep breaths, enjoy the nature. Those are all things that help us improve with stress. We talked about connecting with others and how important that is. I kind of just touched on engaging your senses there. Find that sense that helps you de-escalate. To me, it's sound, music and sound, and then oftentimes visual. So like a sunset, things like that are things that will help me de-escalate or handle my stress a little bit better. Eat a healthy diet. Believe it or not, we seem to live off a lot of fast food and a lot of processed fat, and that's very not only healthy, but it also does not help us get through the stressful parts of our life as we want. So if we can find a way to get more of the omega-3 fatty acids in there, that's helpful. Get some protein in, and then finally get rest. That is probably the biggest bugaboo for all of us in the first responder and our caregiving roles, either clinician or social worker, is that we don't get enough sleep, and that can actually be deadly. A couple of suicides we've had in our police department, unfortunately, a lot of them followed days and days without sleep. So getting a very healthy sleep routine is very important to help you handle your stress. There's nothing wrong with going to your general practitioner and asking for some medicinal help, or you can get some natural help, some natural holistic approach, whatever works for you. Just remember how important that sleep is for you. So this slide is just more of a placeholder to remind me. This is a great video that we're not going to watch. We don't have time. But it's from Dr. Kelly McGonigal from Stanford, and it's a TED Talk. If you want to check it out, it's called Making Stress Your Friend, or The Upside of Stress. And it's a great TED Talk, but one of the things she talks about then is that the importance of the oxytocin. Remember I told you as part of your stress response, you're getting cortisol, you're getting adrenaline, and you're getting oxytocin. Well, oxytocin, among other things, helps repair the damage to the heart that's being done by the narrowing of the arteries of the stress response. So instead, that oxytocin helps widen the pipe back open again. There's receptors on the outside of your heart that actually the oxytocin attaches to and can help repair that damage. But the thing about oxytocin is they nickname the cuddle hormone, but it wants you to connect. So we are biologically wired to want to connect in times of stress. And if you think about how true that is, I bet the last time you had a very stressful situation at work, I'll give you an example. Your boss calls you up on a Friday afternoon and he says nothing more than, Darren, I need to see you first thing Monday morning at 8 o'clock, or they send you an email. Click. That's all you know. If you're anything like me, your mind starts going crazy. What did I do? What did he see me do? What happened? What did I do wrong? But the first thing I normally do is I find my closest friend and say, oh no, I got to go see the boss on Monday. What do you think I did? But see, I'm naturally reaching out. That's what I want to do. And as soon as I do that, I get the oxytocin release in my system. And if my friend is saying, oh, Darren, you're good, you're fine, just by providing me that comfort, they're also getting that oxytocin dump in their system as well. So our problem with our career fields is, remember, we seem to work for a career field that has told us from the day we started to suck it up. If you don't like it, find a new job. I'll go find 3 other people who would take your place tomorrow. Those are all the things we put in our folks' heads from day one, and that's got to change. Instead, we have to say, no, it's okay to want to talk about these things. In fact, I encourage you, because that allows them to maybe get some of that oxytocin as well as you. So find the time to do that video. It's a great video. All right, so we talked a little bit about stress. Why don't we talk a little bit about of how we get from that amygdala back to that prefrontal cortex. This is my best tool I can leave with before we did. It's nothing more than simple diaphragmatic breathing. Oftentimes our people will call it caco breathing because they want to make it a little bit more sounding cool, so cops will do it. But let's call it what it is, which is abdominal or diaphragmatic breathing. And it's nothing more than putting your hand on your chest and your hand on your belly. And the reason I say that, you want to see which one's rising. But all we're going to do is we're going to take a deep breath in through our nose. Hold it for 5. And slowly release. Try to get at least 8 if you can out of that. And we're going to keep on repeating that. So it looks like this. And when you practice the first couple of times, look at your hand. Is your hand on your belly going out? That means you're doing it right. Is the hand on your chest going out? That means you're doing it wrong. Just keep on practicing until you see your belly rise. You need that deep breath. That's very soothing for your vagus nerve that runs from your brainstem all the way through all your major organs. And that's what you need to get to start calming down. That is the best thing I can teach you, because if you're going on that serious call, let's say you're an EMS crew and you're going on that non-breathing child call, you can do this on the way to a call. So when you get there, you're able to stay in your amygdala and do everything you're supposed to do and still provide service for that family in a very positive way. Or if you get ready to see that difficult client, before you call them into your room, do this deep breathing exercise. If you're a police officer, do it on your way to your difficult call or in the middle of your difficult call. If you're going to deal with your family after going from a very awful day in your driveway, do this for about 2-3 minutes before you go into your house. You will be amazed at what a difference this will do. It gets you out of that amygdala and back to that prefrontal cortex. It's just where we need to be operating out of. All right, I got to rush through this because, like I said, we have a lot of information. So trauma, we use what is traumatization? Trauma, it's when traumatization occurs when both your internal and your external resources are inadequate to cope with your external threat. That's from Van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, one of the best books you can ever read or listen to on Audible. I highly suggest it if you want to know what stress and trauma does to your body, but also how ways you can mitigate that. But what we know about this entire equation is it's a 3-part equation. We're saying trauma is going to occur when your internal and external resources can't cope with that external threat. So you have the internal and external resources and the external threat. Of that equation, the one thing we'll never be able to control is the external threat. We picked a career field where the external threat is going to happen quickly and it's going to be unplanned and it'll be different each time. But if I feel myself being traumatized by that and I can't control that, then I need to start looking at my internal and external resources. Those are the things that reside inside of us and outside of us that we use to help us cope with the world a little bit. So once again, in a normal class, we would go ahead and list those off, and I just provided lists for you. So let's look at those. These are the most common answers I'm going to get. So internal resources for most people, they're going to come up and they're going to say my hope, my faith, my love, a sense of security, a sense of being safe or valued, self-awareness, self-regulation. Those are the common ones. External, family, friends, peers, pets, education, water, drinking lots of water, hobbies, journaling, exercise. Those are our external threats. So if you go back to that equation, and we know we're being traumatized, and we know we can't control the external threat, we have to look at our internal and external resources. And so you need to look at your own and say, which one am I missing? Which one can I add? Here's that list Darren gave me of the most common answers. Which one could I add to my life that might help me deal with the stuff even more? So maybe it's, man, I haven't visited my friends for a month. Okay, then go visit your friends. Maybe I haven't exercised lately, then add exercise. Maybe I haven't been to church or religious service or whatever your faith may entail. So get involved back with that again. But find ways to add more resources since you can't control the external threat. That's a great little tool to have to where you're constantly charting what are my resources that I'm using, where am I lacking, where can I add more. It's a simple, simple tool. All right, so remember I told you when we first started talking about normal traumatic stress and chronic stress and trauma, I really want to normalize this for folks because that is, you'll see in some of the symptoms, one of our worst problems is we feel we're not normal for reacting the way we're reacting. But as you see, traumatic stress is a normal reaction to a traumatic event, a normal reaction. So what does that look like for a lot of people? Fear, sadness, guilt, anger, shame, relief. The biggest ones for those of us in our career field that we've chosen, whether you're a clinician or a social worker or you're in the fire EMS police world, is that guilt. I should have done more. What could have I have done more? Why did it happen to this family and not my family? That's a common feeling that we have. And then that shame that usually follows up later with, for feeling the way that I felt, you start getting that feeling of shame. So guilt and shame are two of our biggest concerns that we need to watch for. That relief is something new that I felt recently, and maybe if you had to go through in your city what we went through Kansas City's with the protests that often turned to more violent protests / riots in some cities, you actually felt a great sense of relief when it was done because you kept on expecting the worst every single day. And that's a normal emotional response to a traumatic event. We just need to let our folks know, and I want you to know that that's normal. None of these things make you unnormal. It makes you normal. So what are some of the physical responses to traumatic events? Trembling or shaking. That's usually often from that adrenaline coming when we're done. I don't know if you've been in a serious fight or a serious confrontation before, or maybe even a serious fight with a spouse or a loved one. And at the end, all of a sudden you start trembling, shaking, crying out of nowhere, and you can't control it for no reason. That's normal. That's your body just reacting to that traumatic event. That lump in your throat, that stomach tightening or churning. You may feel your bowels or your bladder wanting to eliminate. Those are all normal. Racing thoughts. Just all we can do is know that they're normal. But on any of these things, we need to remember that they should lessen day by day. It should get a little bit better. If after 4, 5, 6, 7 days we're not noticing any difference at all, then it's time to really seek some help. I'll let you read the slide if you want to, but the biggest thing I want you to know is you can assist. Remember, I said it should lessen in time. You can really speed up the process by not reliving the thing over and over in your brain, trying to say, what should I have done different? What could I have done different? That doesn't, all that does is help you relive it, and at times causes your stress response to kick in all over again. But ignoring your feelings, which is, you see it's in red, ignoring your feelings will slow your recovery. So you don't want to just shove it in a closet, which we'll talk about dissociation coming up in a minute. You need to address it in some capacity, and we'll give you some helpful ways you can do that. So what are some good tips to help get this? Minimize your media exposure. Stay off your Facebook. Stay off your Twitter. Quit reading the stuff over and over and over that keep on coming on your screen, because it just makes you relive it over. And whatever you do, please don't go down the rabbit hole of reading the comments. I make that mistake all the time, even if it's a positive news story about the police. I'm silly enough to go read the comments, and then the people who don't like the police will start making comments, and that just makes you mad, and it just starts the process over and over again. Go ahead and accept those feelings. Remember, they're normal. Don't feel guilty about them. They may go really up and down, and that's all right. Just know they're there. When it says reconnect with those notions, it's emotions, that's good. I want you to feel the emotions. I'll talk about the dissociation in just a second. Volunteer for a cause. So by volunteering, and it's in the Kelly McGonigal video, she actually talks about it, that actually releases oxytocin. So not only would you, if you're going through a very traumatic experience and you're trying to recover from it, not only are you getting the oxytocin by volunteering, but it gets you out of the house. It gets you doing something for somebody else, and that's very healthy for you. We talked about the exercise. We talked about doing it mindfulness. I even told you the 30 minutes per day. You can just say 150 minutes per week if that's easier for you, because that's all you need to really worry about. Now, one thing I will tell you about that is we want to make sure you do that at a moderate pace. And what I mean by that is 70% of your capacity. Because if you had a very stressful day at work, and then out of nowhere, you got out, you said, I got to go exercise. Dan reminded me to go exercise. And you decide, I'm going to go run or lift weights as hard as I can to get all that adrenaline or that tension out. Your body thinks it's back into a stressful situation, and it starts releasing those stress hormones all over again. So be careful if you're using exercise as a way to decompress and self-regulate after a tough day. Do it at 70 to 80% capacity. If you're training for a marathon, if you're training for a CrossFit competition, and you have to add those max fit days in, that's understandable. Do it. Just don't do it as part of your de-escalation routine. So some other things you can do: reach out to others, make stress a priority, find time to relax. I don't care what that looks like. I don't care if that's listening to music, if that's mindful breathing, if it's going for a long walk. Find some time to make stress a priority for you. Maybe that's a meditative practice. And we talked about the eating the healthy diet, so I just want to remind you again, that's a very important part of it. So I'm going to do a very quick exercise. You're not going to have time. I wrote the exercise out, but this is important because I told you I wanted to give you a good way to get back to from compassion fatigue, a little bit of burnout, into that compassion satisfaction again. If you use the analogy of that pitcher of water, remember, every time you give to somebody else, and in this job that you've picked, you're always constantly giving of yourself. You're giving a little bit of a heart and a little bit of your soul to everybody you serve. That takes a little bit out of you. So you got your pitcher of water here, and you're pouring out to others, 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 and before long, your pitcher is empty. And that's that compassion fatigue or burnout that's set in. The only way you're going to get that pitcher filled back up is to do some stuff for yourself. Set up for yourself. You need to live a balanced life, but you need to see where all your time and your energy is going towards. So this is a very simple exercise. I'll walk you through it. If you have a piece of paper and pen handy, feel free to do it. If not, and go back and watch the video later on. But all you're going to do is you're going to do nothing more than a big old snowflake or an asterisk, what you want to call it, but it's just making these 8 quadrants, these 8 lines. And you'll notice there's a 0 in the center of these lines and a 10 on the end of each one of those lines. That's important because that's going to be a satisfaction scale for us. But these lines are on the edge of each line. You're going to list 8 things that are very important to you that you're spending some of your time or a lot of your time and energy towards. You only get to list 7 of them because you'll notice on the 9 o'clock position there's job. You have to list your job. And the reason you have to list that job is unless you're completely retired, you are putting a lot of energy and a lot of effort towards your job. So the other 7, you can list anything you want. I try to make mine as well-rounded as possible. At the time when I did this a couple of years ago, we purchased a new home. I was getting a lot of joy from it, but I was putting a lot of energy and effort towards it. So I listed that. My relationship with my wife, my relationship with my grandchildren, my relationship with my grandchildren, my church life, my exercise life, and reading. Those are the things I listed. Those are things I like to put time and energy towards if I'm living a nice and balanced life. So once you were to pick your 8 things, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to evaluate how satisfied with those areas you are. So with an X or a dot, remember 0 is extremely unsatisfied, 10 is extremely satisfied. You would plot how satisfied you are in those areas. So my job, I'm very satisfied with at the time I did this. If I had to do it right now, I'd probably do it about a 6. My new home at the time was an 8. My relationship with my wife was a 7. My relationship with my children was an 8. My grandchildren was a 5, and the reason it was rated a 5, you'll see coming up. My relationship in my church was about a 5. My exercise was a 2, and my reading was a 1. That's your satisfaction level. So now the third part of this, which was the most important pieces that we can actually talk about, is you're going to plot how much energy or how much effort you put towards those particular area. This is the telltale part right here. The wider the arrow, and you can do it with the length of an arrow if you wanted to. You can do how long the arrow is compared to how short, but the way we teach it is the wider the arrow, that's how much energy or effort you're putting towards. The narrowest arrow, or in the case of reading on mine, you'll see broken hash marks. That means I put no energy or effort towards it. So my job satisfaction was a 10. Actually, it would have been about a 15 when I did this, but I put a lot of energy and effort towards that. Same as my new home. Now, my wife, you see there's not a whole lot of energy or effort that was going into it. We were on autopilot, and that's probably why I rated it as a 7. My children, I must have had some things going on in their life. You see a little bit more energy or effort being put in towards it than my relationship with my wife. My grandchildren, they all live within 5 miles of me. And when I did this, I hadn't seen them for about a month because everybody's schedule was so busy. So that's why I rated my relationship so low at the time. But you see, I was putting no energy or effort towards it. Same with my church. So my church was, that's kind of a tricky one, because while it was a 5, and I wasn't putting a whole lot of energy or effort towards it, there was times it would be a 1, and I was putting a lot of energy or effort towards it, because in my church, I was doing a lot of serving. And when I was serving, yes, I was getting some satisfaction by serving others, but once again, think of that picture. I'm pouring out for others, and I don't get enough back in return. So the 2 things on mine, the reason my balance was so out of whack, when I ask people in a class, what do you think about my balance? Oftentimes people look at mine and say, it's not too bad. But here's why mine's really out of whack. There's only 2 things, and 2 things only I do strictly for myself. And that was reading and exercise. And as you can see, those are my 2 lowest areas of satisfaction and my 2 lowest areas of energy or effort. To be truly resilient in stress and trauma, and to live a balanced life, and to not let the physical and emotional effects of chronic stress and traumatic stress get to us, we need to be more balanced. Because much like a wheel, an out of alignment wheel is going to crash eventually, and that's what happens to us. But there's a big but here. You need to have things on that wheel that are just for you. So a lot of times people will say, well, I spend a lot of time with my children and my wife and my grandchildren because I get things back in return. And that's very, very true. But you're still pouring out. You're still pouring out to others and getting back. So you're really not filling your pitcher. You're just not maybe depleting your pitcher as much as you normally would. So find things that you do for yourself and yourself only. Maybe that's going hunting, fishing, hiking, running, reading a book, praying every night. Whatever that is for you, meditating, find that thing, because that's how we fill that pitcher back up. So I look at mine, I say, all right, if you're anything like me, my schedule is so crazy, how am I going to find more time? Well, if you look at my job, I guarantee you I could take some time from my job to make some time for myself, couldn't I? And if you look at your life, you would be the exact same way. Because we have a very big tendency in our career fields that we've chosen in the first responder world and caregiving world, is that we overinvest at work and we underinvest at home. And that causes a lot of problems. My job, and I retire next year after 28 years, they are not going to care that I was even here. In fact, a year from now, most people will forget I even worked for this job. And God forbid if I were to be killed tomorrow, some really sadness, obviously, but sooner or later people would forget about me. Excuse me. But do you think my family would forget about me? But remember, who am I not investing my time with? I'm investing all my time at work, but I'm not investing my time with them. So find ways to make that important part of your life, as well as doing things for yourself. Get out of the habit of doing everything for our work and get back into the habit of doing things for our home life as well, which makes us more resilient, keeps us balanced. Now, I recommend you do this at least every 30 days. Things change quickly. This is one of those things when I have when I have staff working for me, we'll sit down maybe every month and we'll do it together. Which again, we don't have to share, but if I do it as well, then I can get them to do it and say, hey, let's spend about 20 minutes and do our balance wheel and see what we need to do. All right, I told you we'd talk about dissociation. I do want to talk about it a little bit. We made a scale. We really limited our scale down to these 3 things. And if you notice, it's normally it's labeled a little bit different. It's much like a traffic light. So the bottom would be normally green labeled, because there's healthy, there's warning, and then there's things we need to worry about. So the healthy part of dissociation, it allows you to do 2 things at once. Basically, you're on autopilot. Here's a perfect example of that. You get a very stressful day at work. I mean, we're talking you're call to call, or you send lots of very high risk or high energy clients. And at the end of the day, you're driving home and you pull into your driveway, and out of nowhere, you realize you're home and you say, how the heck did I just get here? You don't remember the drive. That's dissociation. Your brain's just putting it away. You don't need to hear it anymore. Good part of it is you're just not remembering. So if you were a good driver, you were driving good, I promise you. If you're a bad driver, I hate to tell you, you were still driving bad. That doesn't alleviate that for you, so you need to work on that. But that's all that healthy side of dissociation is. Then we get to the warning of dissociation. That's the amnesia. And it should be short-term amnesia. So think about a critical incident you may have been involved with. In our world of police officers, and most of the labor contracts, you're going to see that after a critical incident, they're not required to give statements for anywhere from 48 to 96 hours, depends what your contract states. There's a reason for that, because that short-term amnesia is very, very, very normal. It's your brain's way of protecting you. Maybe it was such a horrific situation or scene that my brain knows better, and it says, Darren, you cannot handle all this at this time. I'm not going to dump out all these memories at the same time. So it lets me remember a little bit more each day, maybe each hour, maybe every 4 hours. It's going to add more to my memory. That didn't used to be a problem, because if I gave a statement after a serious incident and then next day I had to amend that statement, or next day amend it again because I'm remembering more, which is very, very common and normal. Nowadays we have video cameras. And so they have the actual scene, and you're trying to make a statement based on what you remember, and what you remember may not match that scene because your brain hasn't released all that information yet. So that's why it's important. And then yellow is, it's fine, it's natural, it can happen, but if it gets to the 96-hour mark and you're still having memory problems, then it's time to really get some professional help involved. So that's when you need to get your mental health clinicians for your agency involved with and get in some counseling. And then finally, the last one is one I want to spend about 5 minutes on, is that emotional numbing. That's the one we are notorious for in our world, because we see so much worse of the worst, and we're told that you shouldn't feel that way in our career field. So we shove it all in a closet, and we just shut our emotions off altogether. And the one thing we do know is our brain's not going to let that happen forever. So sooner or later, that closet door is going to come crashing open, and everything you've been shoving in there is going to pop out, and it's usually going to be at the most inopportune time. So we tell our folks, we don't want you to shut off your emotions. We want you to feel those emotions, to address those emotions. And there's 2 quick methods I can give you that I'm comfortable with. The first one's actually in the ProQual. The very last page of the ProQual, they talk about this. And you just find an inanimate object like a light switch. I use my watch. I teach you to use your watch because most of us have a watch on us all the time. And you basically just say, you touch your watch and you say, I'm shutting my emotions off. And then after the end of your shift, you go back and you say, touch your watch again and say, I'm turning my emotions back on. That way you get home and you're not this emotional zombie walking around your house and your family doesn't want anything to do with you or your friends. You can try to feel emotions again. Now, method does not work for me because I oftentimes would find myself not turning my emotions back on. So what we teach in the 4-hour and 8-hour version of our course is something called leaning into your pain. And what leaning into the pain means is you're simply leaning into the pain. You're leaning into it to where the pain smacks you around a little bit, the pain of that situation, but it doesn't overwhelm you. So if I'm at a very traumatic scene, once again, I apologize if this brings up any bad memories for somebody, but a non-breathing child, I know that's going to be hurtful as I have children myself. I know the whole scene's going to be awful to deal with, but it's okay for me to feel that sorrow. It's okay for me to feel that anger if there's a violence to it. That's okay. And it's okay to say it's okay to feel that way. Now, I can't let it overwhelm me and where I can't do my job. I have to be there for the family. I still have a job to do. But the way you lean into it is you just acknowledge that it's there. And then when you're done at the very, very end, what I do with all my folks is I bring them around the police car and we talk about the scene. It's like a micro debrief. And I'll always lead off because if I lead off, it makes it safe. And I'll say, I don't know about you, but that scene made me, whatever made me sad. It scene made me mad. I can't handle any more of these calls. We've got to do something about this situation. And then usually people will do the same thing with you at that time. And all we're doing is we're labeling how we feel. Because if I can label it, that means I'm feeling it. So name it to tame it. Remember what they say? If I can name how I'm feeling, that helps me tame it, as opposed to shoving it in that closet to where it's going to come out at a most inopportune time at a later time. All right, I need to speed through the very end here real quick. Let's talk about mindfulness. If you've never heard about mindfulness, it's an incredible concept that's been around forever, but it's just being present in your moment. Too much of the time, we're constantly living in the past. I should have done this, I could have done this, or in the future, what am I going to be doing? And I start worrying about these things, as opposed to just being in the present moment and paying attention without any judgment, accepting it, and everything that's going on. And we actually have a great course. I'll give you a resource for mindfulness and meditation as far as that goes as well. But look at these benefits. These are benefits of a mindful routine, and one of the best mindful routines you can actually do is meditation. These are proven study after study to help alleviate these symptoms. And if I put these symptoms right next to those symptoms of PTS, you're going to see they're almost identical. So if you want to know the symptom, how to help that stress, that chronic stress, how to deal with that PTS that you're constantly suffering from, a mindful routine will help you immensely. Don't have time to go over warrior meditation with you, but if you want to, what I would suggest you on meditation, there's thousands of meditations out there. Meditation is like a training for your brain. It's like preparing your brain to live in a more mindful, it's an exercise. It's an exercise for your brain to be more mindful. So find a good meditation that works for you. The one I did, and I'd be happy to share in a different time, is it takes about 20 minutes, and it's a foolproof, fail-proof method to meditate, because so much of the time we stop meditating because we feel we're doing it wrong. But find the one that works for you. There's some with music. There's some that are guided by a voice. There's some that involve what they call progressive muscle relaxation, excuse me, where they're having you clench and release parts of your body. There's all certain different one. You find what works for you and just find a practice. That's all I want you to do for the time being. So give me some ideas, close out this before we open it up for some questions regarding some ideas for FTOs and our supervisors or the bosses in the room. Biggest one I can tell you is encourage communications. We talked about talking about that scene. Remember, ignoring the feeling is going to slow your recovery. So get your folks to talk about it. Make it a safe place for them to talk. It doesn't have to be a big drawn out debrief. That can be done later on. But if you start sharing about how you feel, they're going to start sharing about how they feel, I promise you. Encourage self-care for your folks. That balance wheel, remember, every 30 days would be good. That ProQual, every quarter, a good thing. There's a self-care assessment I could provide for you. If you get out there and just Google self-care assessments, you will find all kinds of products that are out there that are free that you can use. And it just shows you how you're doing at any given time. But the ProQual is one of my favorites, like I told you, because it's so simple. We just talked about providing that's the safer environment, but you just need your folks to know that it's okay to come to you. It's okay to come to a boss. It's okay to come to a peer. It's okay to talk about them. We don't want them to put these away. We used to tell them, hey, you don't like it up, suck it up, buttercup, go find a new job. That's not what we're telling them anymore. We're telling them, I understand why you feel that way. I understand how you could feel that way. That's not a very good situation you just went through. And what you're feeling is very normal after undergoing a situation like that. And then, of course, please provide resources such as EAP, peer support programs. Hopefully you have a peer support program in your agency. If not, look for regional agencies. I'm part of a Commander Peer Support, the first one in the country. We have about 40 of us now that are peer support trained and trained in ISIF. And commanders from across the world can call us and we can do peer support over the phone, because oftentimes a commander doesn't want to reach out for help because they feel like they're the boss, and he or she feels like they shouldn't be feeling that way. They're the boss. They're supposed to have all the answers, so they don't know who to turn to. And being a boss has its own unique stresses to it because you're responsible for so many. So that's one of the reasons. We also have regional ones for dispatchers. I know of state ones for corrections. I know medical professions have plenty of peer support, so look for peer support. And then if you're so inclined, your agency may have chaplains. So let me get a couple more, some great resources. Yoga for First Responders, check out their website. Save a Warrior and My Battle Within are two organizations I highly recommend. They're 5-day retreats, both of them, that are basically, they're in-house, they're both free of charge. The people just have to get there. And it's 5 days of being a member of a cohort of about 10 to 12 people, sometimes as many as 15, learning how to deal with the trauma and stresses of our lives. And they do a lot of meditation, and they do some team building exercises, and they do a lot of introspection. And they're both good programs. I left both of their websites are on the screen. If not, you can get them later on. And then finally, I told you about mindfulness and meditation. I'm part of a team called the Pause First Project, and that's the Facebook page for that. And there's also a website you can go to. Kim Colgrove was married to a former FBI agent and a former St. Louis police officer who retired after 30 years of service, and shortly thereafter took his own life. And Kim was devastated and wanted to find a way to help other first responders. So we connected, and she now has a very robust program after a couple of years now of teaching mindfulness and meditation for first responders and people in the CIT world and whoever needs it in this type of world. So we're getting ready to go live with an online academy very soon. So please check that out. She also has a great book out there. It's on Amazon. Just search Kim Colgrove or any place you normally get your books. A great resource once again. So any of these are things I would also throw at you. So the final ones, we've kind of talked about them all, but the one I did not talk about was coping strategies. So let's recap. We've had the ProQual. We did the balance wheel, the diaphragmatic breathing, the recognizing and reaching out, recognizing how we're feeling is normal and reaching out to others. Remember that oxytocin release you get. We're wired to reach out to others when we're feeling stress. Don't let your ego get in your way, and that's the problem. What you're feeling is normal, and it's okay to feel that way. And then all the programs, a mindful practice, journaling, whatever it is, you find that, but find ways to keep your pitcher full, because the quickest way to getting burned out and feeling that compassion fatigue is letting your pitcher get empty. That pitcher, we need to keep it full at all times, or as close to full as we can, because our normal job is going to drain us day in, day out. We're going to give a little bit of ourselves. We need to find ways that we can give back to ourselves, believe it or not. A very weird phenomenon occurred, I noticed. I thought it was always just me who felt this way until I started asking this question about 2 years ago. If we were in a group right now and all of us together, and I ask, all right, how many of you feel guilty or angry when somebody buys you an expensive or an excessive amount of presents for your birthday or Christmas? Most people's hands would go up. I know that because 98% of the time, 98% of the hands go up. And I find that really weird, because if I ask that same question to a bunch of bankers or IT people, chances are they don't feel that way because I've asked them that. We are so accustomed to doing things for others, and we're so wired to doing things for others, we forgot that we're worthy to do things for ourselves. It's okay to do things for ourselves. And not only is it okay, we have to do things for ourselves. If we want to be able to serve our clients, we need to be at that full picture, and we need to do that. To do that, we need to do things for ourselves. So don't feel guilty. I've learned not to feel guilty about that. I still monitor, and when I do feel guilty, I remind my wife to remind me that I'm worthy of it and let me go buy something fun. So it's a good excuse to go buy something when you want to. But just try not to let that overwhelm you as well. All right, before we get to questions, I haven't even gone to the screen to see if there is any questions, because I've been sharing my screen with you. I want to leave this up for a second. So you have my email, darren.ivey@gmail.com. You can also, for the time being, for the next 8 months, if you want to, get a hold of me at darren.ivey@kcpd.org. My cell phones, both of those are on there, except the first one is a number that's good for at least another 8 months. After that, you may want to use the second one. If you're interested in more information, I'll be happy to share with you. We also have a 4-hour presentation at Building Resilience, Surviving Secondary Trauma, that we do. We have an 8-hour version of that course. I can modify anything for anybody usually, and this course has been, those courses have been highly successful because it kind of hits at what we all feel. Hopefully you got something out of today as well. I know we kind of had to limit ourselves to the 50 minutes or 40 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes, because I wanted to give you time for questions if you had any. But remember, this trauma that we're exposed to and the stress that we're exposed to on a daily basis is real. And it affects us emotionally, and it affects us physically, and it can shorten our life, and it can shorten the quality of our life. And what we don't want to do is have that happen anymore. So use some of these skills that I presented. If not, if you don't like any of them, find your own, but do something to help you survive this career field you have chosen. So with that being said, I am going to, and Gabe, I don't know if we're live on the chat, but if we are, I will check to see about questions. And I have one that says, any special thoughts about self-care during COVID? So that's a very good question that Jeff asked everybody. But I'll tell you, the biggest thing about what I've learned on the self-care during this COVID time is, unfortunately, the job we picked using an explosives put at a higher risk of exposure than anywhere else. So if you just know that going into it, that's that control piece we talked about. And don't dwell on what you can't control. You can dwell on all those steps you can't control all you want, that just makes you anxious, and it makes you dread going to work, and it makes you suffer from anxiety. But you know that, hey, I can wear a mask at times, most of the time, if that's what you want to do. Hey, I can wash my hands and sanitize my hands as often as I want to. I can keep my hands from my face. I can avoid going into crowded situations at times. So you concentrate on what you can concentrate on. Don't worry about the other ones, please, because that just drives you feeling crazy to yourself. You say, man, this anxiety is really killing me. So please concentrate on what you can control. The slides that I have here, people ask, can I share them? These slides, yes, you can share. I don't, my other presentations, I do not give control of, because too many things were done with them improperly, meaning that the information was incorrectly being shared. So I will definitely, I don't mind sharing this one. I think this is pretty self-satisfied or self-explanatory. I can't speak anymore. Explains itself. How's that? Sorry, it's been a long afternoon. So yes, if you want to email, I'll be happy to share this, or I'll set up a Dropbox, or I can send you a PDF or something like that. Tips for the family members, that's a good one as well, because what we found out is that we are destroying our family, folks. I hate to tell you this, but that was my aha moment when in my 4-hour and 8-hour class, I share a lot about my private life that I didn't have time to share with you, but I saw how it was destroying my life and my family, and I didn't even know it. And it was these tools that I learned when I put this course together with my friends, and the tools that I've learned with some of the programs I've gone through that have saved my life. It saved my marriage. It saved my family. It's rebuilt relationships. So these same tools I just gave you, use them for your families and talk to your families. You have to find the balance though. You need to talk about your day to your spouse if they want to hear your day, because the worst thing you do is tell them nothing. That's that lack of control that they start feeling then. But you have to find the happy medium. You have to have the pre-talk saying, I will share some things with you, but please respect the fact that I'm not going to share others because I had to relive a certain thing, or I may traumatize you by sharing. So find that, but do talk to your family about your day if you can find a way. Talk to them about how they're feeling. Make it safe. My now 11-year-old son has now started sharing with me how he feels, how he's scared for me, how he's terrified. But before he wouldn't have done that because I didn't give him that safe environment to do that. It's a whole new world if you can do something like that. We have a course we can do for the families as well. It's similar to the 4-hour version. We just do a modified version of that. There's other resources out there. What I recommend a suicide prevention class for officers' families like QPR. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with QPR. However, I always recommend educational classes for families as well as first responders. So especially when it comes to suicide prevention, we talk about that a lot more in the 4 and 8-hour version. What I know about the suicide prevention is not only do you need to know about what to be looking for, but we also have to change our language in first responder world. And if CIT officers know this, we already teach them that we don't talk around an issue. We don't say, are you thinking about harming yourself? We actually bring out the words, are you thinking about killing yourself? Do you have plans to take your own life? That's easy when we have somebody in a CIT environment we're dealing with. Try asking that same question to your own family. Because I ask first responders, including myself, who've had to ask that question for a family member, what do you do when it's that time? And you know what we do? We go back to the same thing everybody else does. Are you thinking about harming yourself? So we practice a lot of the suicide prevention during the 4 and 8-hour course, but that is so important right now. Blue Help's a good website. Code 9 Families is a good website. There's all kinds of good information out there. Find some prevention programs. But the big thing is it goes back to what I talk about. We have to have an environment where it's safe for our folks to talk to us about things. They don't have to worry about losing their job or being ostracized. They need to be able to come to somebody and say, I am struggling. And thank goodness in my organization, we have made giant leaps and bounds in my large organization and other organizations. And that's where a huge regional peer support program is so effective as well, because maybe you don't want to go to somebody in your own agency, but you will go to somebody 4 agencies away or somebody from another state. And that's something where like Code 9 Families can help you out. They can connect you with certified peer people from other agencies. There's also all kinds of law enforcement suicide prevention lines out there. So a Safe Call Now is another one that you can reach out to. I can go on and on and on. So just find those for you. I mentioned staying off social media and ignoring the comments, but isn't that impossible right now? So, because staying connected to families. So here's what I would suggest to you, purely a suggestion, because I love my Facebook. I've come so close to deactivating it several times. If you don't have the willpower to stay out of those comments, then I would find a way to start a new Facebook page and do nothing but your family and your close friends. That way you can do what you want to do. I'm training myself to stay away from that social media comments. My friends list has gone from 1,000. I still have 1,000, but maybe there's only 100 of them I'm actually following, so I don't get bombarded with far right newsfeed and far left newsfeed. I love you, friends. I don't care how you feel politically. I don't care how you feel about the police. I don't care how you feel about social justice movements. I just love you as my friend, and I want to share your family pictures with you, and I want you to see mine, and we can have do funny memes and funny videos, and that's what I use Facebook for. Other people maybe not so much, so you have to find that happy medium on what you can do, but build the safeguards in, please, because you're going to start going down that rabbit hole and start that anxiety kicking in and that fear and the anger just by constantly being exposed to it. What's my response to the officer who won't seek help because of the stigma? Do I have a specific response? Oh man, that's a good one. All right, so the best thing I can tell you is if you can find somebody, preferably higher in rank, who will share their story, that's very beneficial. And what I mean by that is, one of the reasons this training started off so beneficial was that, and I'm at the time was a captain, I'm a major of a large metropolitan police agency, and if you'd gone through my 4 and 8 hour version course, you would say, I put my heart and my soul out there for all of you all to trample on all you want to. Because I want you to know from my experience what happened. I want you to see how it nearly destroyed my life and how that doesn't have to be that way and how there's a way out of that. And here's the tools you can do. And by somebody who is maybe higher in rank, sharing that, that's a feeling of safety for the next person. So the biggest one, the best story I can't even share with you because it's so long, but it has to do with my child, my son Matthew, and it's how I reacted in a non-life-threatening condition. But you would have thought that I had just gone through a life-threatening condition because he was 6, and excuse me, I berated him so bad verbally that he literally covered his hands over his ears and cowered in a corner, crying and shaking from me. And that was my big aha moment. And I could tell you the rest of the story, but I realized I had done the same thing to my adult children. And I since had gone back and we've talked and we've shared tools and everything, and they all forgiven me. And they actually said I wasn't as bad as I thought I was. I just don't think they've seen me creep in them yet. I think that'll happen one of these days. They'll see a little bit of me coming out on them in a situation. But I gave them the tools that I didn't have. But I share that story in great detail, and that's the one that seems to connect with everybody more than anybody else, because we all think that if I'm not feeling suicidal, this job is not eating me alive. But if you look at how many of us divorced, how many of our children don't want anything to do with us, how many of our friends stopped hanging around with us. I say I was not suicidal. I've never been suicidal, folks, but I say I've been very homicidal to my relationships throughout my entire life as an adult. If things get tough, if I don't like the way it was making me feel, I had no problem sabotaging it to get out of there. And that, you see, is what our people respond to, because they see that in themselves and they say, wow, okay. So maybe it'll help answer the question. Maybe you share stories, find someone who that can connect it, to share stories that does not seem so overwhelming, and let them know, hey, this is not a death sentence. This is, I will tell you from my experience, folks, tens of thousands of people feel this exact same way from all walks of first responder world and clinicians and doctors and nurses. That's normal. And just show people that is normal. Oh, your feeling is normal. You are not unnormal. Please, these are unnormal situations you're in, and we stick to them on a daily basis. But you are normal, but your feeling's normal. And my Darren may not feel the same way. he's had these feelings before, and why Jeff may not feel this way, he's had these feelings before. We all, based upon our resiliency level and based upon our experiences in life, we're going to react differently. But it's okay. The fact that you can feel these things, that's half the battle. The fact that you're acknowledging that you're feeling these things, that's the great majority of the battle. Then we just give you the tools to go from there. And the other thing I would highly recommend, I didn't say it in our presentation, is I am a firm believer in mental health, not only for yourself, self-care, but reaching out to professionals. I have a therapist I will see. Maybe it's not more than every 9 months if I'm going through a good patch, but I call them my well baby checkups. And sometimes it's just going in there and burying my soul and just to talk. And I feel so much better afterwards. And then to talk to me saying, have you been doing this? And oftentimes, even though I teach this all the time, I say, no, of course not, because why would the teacher do what they teach? Because we have to remind ourselves, we're human beings. If you're a therapist out there today and you don't have your own therapist, please get one. That's the biggest thing I've seen is my therapists don't have therapists. You need someone to also remind you of what you need to be doing and for someone you can share your information with. I think I've got all the questions unless I missed any. I'm just going down real quick. I don't want to cut anybody off. Gabe, am I missing any? I don't see any more, so I don't think so.
I don't see any. I think that you have them all. So if you want to thank everybody, reiterate that they're welcome to contact you, I think you're set. I'm just the voice in the sky. Yeah, it's a voice in the sky who kept me online today. So I do want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank NAMI of Tennessee for having me here. This is such an important topic to discuss. Don't forget, it is on their YouTube channel, the recorded version, so you can watch this over and over again and listen to my voice and these awesome slides. But more importantly, or just as importantly, is you have my contact information. I tried to leave it up there as long as I could. So feel free to reach out to me if you have questions, if you have anything that you didn't want to discuss and you want to discuss them privately, or if you need some resources. I'm always here to help. And don't forget, you have my Gmail, my KCPD one, at least through February. And the reason I keep saying that, folks, is I'm probably going to retire in February after 28 years. Not positive, but probably. So I want you to have the contact info for after. That's to Gmail. You can still use Darren.Ivey, same spelling, at KCPD, Kansas City Police Department.org. So thank you very much for having me. I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope to hear from you.